Good morning, Alaska. I wanted to provide an update on a busy week here in Washington, D.C. and some of the things that I've been working on. A number of them are very strong traditional areas of my focus. Still trying to get literally daily the Willow Project approved by the Biden administration. We were supposed to have a meeting at the White House yesterday. They canceled it, unfortunately. We're pressing on that. I find it remarkable the president is green-lighting more oil production in Venezuela, but still withholding Alaska. Stay tuned on that. Veterans, I've been leading the effort. You may have seen on TV all these ads by trial lawyer firms on the Camp Lejeune issue. Really disturbing, where a lot of these trial lawyers are taking the money from the sick Marines at Camp Lejeune. You may have seen that. I introduced a bill, tried to pass it yesterday in the Senate to fix this outrage. We're going to keep focusing on that, taking care of our veterans in Alaska and across the country. And then finally, you're watching what's going on in China. I'm leading a very big bipartisan letter to Chinese officials saying, we're watching it closely. Do not do what you did in 1989, last time there were protests in Tiananmen Square and you killed hundreds of your own citizens. That will sink U.S.-China relations to an all-time low. So we're warning the Chinese not to kill their own citizens. That letter will be going out soon. But what I really wanted to focus on today was the issue and the vote I took on the bill, the Respect for Marriage Act. And I do want to begin by thanking Alaskans. We have heard from hundreds, if not more, thousands. We tried to take input from so many of you. I had listening sessions with a number of our faith leaders, and I just want to thank people because a lot of what we heard from Alaskans, we listened to, tried to get in the bill, couldn't get it all in there. And so I want to encourage people to read a letter that I sent, my team and I put together. It's long, but it's detailed, and it goes into a lot of the issues at play in this legislation because there's been concerns and questions and, frankly, some criticisms. So please take a look at that letter. I'll make sure it's on our website. So let me give you the context and some of the highlights of the way I was thinking about this bill. First of all, as all of you know, in 2015, the Supreme Court in the Obergefell decision declared that same-sex marriage was a constitutional right. So people of the same sex are being married in every state in the country, including Alaska. Whether this bill passed or not, that was going to continue. That happened, as I said, in 2015. What I said then was I thought that decision should have been left to the states, not the Supreme Court. And that, of course, it's the Supreme Court. It's the rule of law in America. I would respect the decision. But what I would do, as I've done throughout my Senate career, is focus on advancing and protecting religious liberty for all Americans, all Alaskans. This has been my focus since I've been in the Senate, and in particularly after the Obergefell decision and during the negotiations on this bill. And if you look at the letter, I won't go into all the details, but I am very encouraged that the religious liberty protections in this legislation are the most extensive that we have had, that Congress has passed since the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. That is really important. In particular, in this bill, it calls out the religious liberty protections of organizations and individuals, millions and millions of people across our country who have traditional views of marriage. That was important, a big important element of that. Some of these are the federal government can't retaliate against organizations and individuals who hold traditional views of marriage, can't take away tax exemption status, can't force organizations to perform marriages that aren't traditional marriages. So there's a number. Please take a look at the bill, our letter. There's a many in there. And it's not just me that is saying these are very extensive and historic religious liberty protections. Several prominent religious groups across the country who believe and continue to teach traditional marriage as a core tenet of their faith, including the Mormon Church, Seventh-day Adventists, National Association of Evangelicals, the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, and others have all been supportive, very supportive, of these new and extensive, expansive religious liberty protections in this bill. But of course, not all faith groups were in agreement with that. My own faith group, the Catholic Church, was not supportive of this legislation. And the criticisms from some of these groups, including the Family Research Council, was primarily that the religious liberty protections did not go far enough. Now, I believe that is a legitimate and fair criticism, and it's one of the things that I did throughout this process was not only try to get more religious liberty protections in the bill, but demanded that senators who had amendments to expand religious liberty protections, for example, Senators Lee and Senators Langford, get votes on these. You may have seen we voted on these, we debated these. I supported those more expansive protections. But at the end of the day, I believe that this is much more of a religious liberty protection bill, particularly for organizations that hold traditional views of marriage, and has expanded that dramatically, even without the passage of those other amendments. And because of the judges that we've put on federal courts and the Supreme Court recently, religious liberty cases that aren't addressed in this bill are making important progress under the First Amendment. For example, adoption agencies and private individuals in their own beliefs, recently in the U.S. Supreme Court. I finally want to just make one final point. It's a little bit more detailed on an important issue that I've been following for a long time. When Obergefell was passed, as I mentioned, it made a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, but did little at all to expand religious liberty protections. And one of the things that came up in the oral arguments of that case and concerns brought up by some of the justices was that if this constitutional right was adopted by the Supreme Court, which it was, that it would open the door to cases against religious institutions, religious educational institutions that held the traditional view of marriage. They cited this case called Bob Jones University versus the United States. I won't go into too much detail on that, but that essentially was a case where there was a university that had overtly racist policies. They prohibited interracial dating and marriage at this university. The United States government said, we're going to take away your tax exemption because of your racist policies. There was concern from many, including justices on the Supreme Court and the Obama administration Solicitor General, that said if same-sex marriage was made a constitutional right, that then the federal government might go after universities and religious organizations, their tax-exempt status, for holding traditional views of marriage. Essentially, in some ways, equating those traditional views wrongly, in my view, with racism that came in the Bob Jones University case. This has been a huge concern for religious liberty advocates, myself included, over the last several years, and was even highlighted, as I mentioned, by President Obama's Solicitor General, who said this would be an issue, and Supreme Court justices who dissented in Obergefell. What I want to just mention here is this law, in my view, completely shuts the door on that issue. this law says that people of decent and honorable traditions hold different views of marriage, including traditional views. This law says that the federal government cannot take away tax-exempt status and other benefits that the federal government has with traditional religious organizations under this law. This, in my view, is an enormously important element. This concern about the Bob Jones University tax-exempt status attack on religious educational institutions and other religious institutions that hold traditional views of marriage, in my view, that door is slammed shut. And that is really, really important. So in summary, this is one of the toughest votes that I've taken. We put a lot of time and effort listening to everybody. But I just want to end by saying, as I've always said, as your senator, I will always commit to protect your right as Americans under the First Amendment and federal law to preach, teach, believe in your faith. That's the American way, and I believe that is a really important element of this bill. Thank you very much, and please take the time, if you have it, to read the letter that my team and I put out on this bill to answer additional questions.